So here we have an oxyacetylene torch. One is green and one is black, but sometimes they come in different colors depending on what your distributor is. So the key to that is you have to check the label on the bottle, and this one says oxygen, so that's what we want. And this one over here says acetylene dissolved, or flammable gas. Both are extremely dangerous. We have a high pressure, and this is a little bit of a lower pressure. There's more in the oxygen than there's in acetylene. The other thing you have to check is that these have a different regulator, and they can cut up to really thick material, 12 inches down to 1/16, depending on the tip size. And we'll get into the tip size on another video. But for this demonstration, we're going to cut about 3/4 of an inch up to an inch. This is what opens the bottle. So basically, when you open a bottle up on the oxygen, you stand away from it. You don't put your face right next to it, just in case something's going to go wrong. So we turn this all the way on. And then we turn this 3/4 of a turn. The reason why we turn it 3/4 of a turn is because if we have a fire or something, we can come over there real quick and turn it off, okay? This one's always on, all the way. There's two seats here, one up here and one here to allow gas or oxygen to go to the line. We turn this off when we're done torch cutting. Turn this off because we don't want to leave this open. It could be a hazard. Now we have so we turn this on all the way, and we turn this 3/4. Now we have the gauges. What do they mean? This is a high pressure gauge. This tells you the pressure in the bottle. This is a low pressure gauge because if you look at the numbers here, this is lower than here. So this tells us how much is in the bottle. This tells us how much is in this line. This is a high pressure gauge and a low pressure gauge. Low pressure tells us how much is in the line. So when we're adjusting the torch, depending on the size of the tip torch, we're going to keep this at 40 psi. And notice it says psi here because that's a United pounds per square inch. And then we're going to come over here and we're going to keep it on 7. Okay? So now that our gauges are set, we know we're ready to torch. But what happens if there's a leak? How do you find it? Well, you don't smell the line and see if you got a leak. You can't stick your ear there and try to hear it. There's a secret. So if you look at this gauge right here, if I turn this bottle off, those pressure gauges should stay. But if we have a slight leak, now we know we have a leak. So we have to check with soap and water. So we're going to put soap and water on the connectors and find out where the bubbles are to see maybe it's loose right here. It could be loose over here, or we might even have a damaged hose. So we always check that. So if I turn this back to what we were starting with, and I turned it on slow. I don't want to turn it on real fast. Turn it real slow. Notice that the gauges haven't moved. Notice that the gauges did move there. If we had an acetylene leak, it would look like this. I turn this off. We wait for the gauge, and then if you look real closely, something's happening. They're moving. We have a leak. I fixed it. I turned it back on slowly, 3/4 of a turn, and I set this at 7 pounds. Now this is our torch. So these are quick connects. You just pull them and then they're apart. Push it in. Now we're good. Notice something else though. Look at the threads here. This is what they call a notch thread, and this one doesn't have a notch thread on it. So we know this is a left-handed thread, and we know this is a right-handed thread. So this one goes on the gas side, okay? Because we know that all these fittings, this says fuel, and this one says oxygen. So we don't get them confused. Even if you look down here, this is a notch thread, notch thread, notch thread. So this regulator goes to this bottle, okay? So, now everything is pretty much set to go. We know we don't have a leak. We know this is high pressure. We know this is low pressure. We turn this all the way on. This is a 3/4, just in case there's an accident, okay? And this little doodad right here adjusts the pressure in the line, okay? So, we could turn this up, and you notice that as I increase this, the pressure's gonna go up. So now it's at 80 PSI, but I don't want 80 PSI, I want it a little lower. So I turn it, and nothing happens. Well, that's because you have to release gases in there. So we're gonna release it. Notice it's coming down. I open my valve, and now I'm back to 40. I close it, and I'm good. Notice you look real close here, it says 15. That means you can't go past 15 PSI. It becomes unstable. The gas becomes volatile. So what happens when you grab a torch and it's way over there? Now it's dangerous. So we need to decrease it back to the 7 pounds. So we're gonna crack the acetylene line here, because this is acetylene. We're gonna crack it a little bit, and we're gonna decrease the pressure by turning the regulator knob down to 7. Close our valve. Now we're at 7. Okay? If the cart's knocked over, then we got a big problem. You bust this little valve and that thing's gonna take off. So we have to always take this regulator off with the crescent wrench, or the right wrench, not a crescent wrench. You take this off and you put a safety cap on there. And I'll show you that in a minute. Now that we know that everything's set, so that means only a 1/4 inch thick. That's how thick these bottles are. So if you drop them and knock them down and you puncture or put a hole in it, it may explode or take off. These are known to travel at least 5 blocks. And sometimes they go straight up in the air, and sometimes they'll just go through brick walls like that. And there's no way of getting out of it. So when you move these, you should have the cap on it, or at least have the gases off, okay? These are the caps that you would use. You take off the regulator and put that cap on there and screw it on. The other thing you don't want to do is put any oil on it. This is brass, so brass doesn't need oil. If you put oil on here, oil and oxygen are combustible. They can explode. So we don't use oil on any of the fittings at all. No pipe dope, no, they call it like pipe tape, nothing, because we want to know if there's a leak. So I'm going to roll up my hose. I'm going to turn off my gases because I'm going to go over here in a second to cut. I turn these off, and I turn this off. I get behind it, I tilt it up, and I push the cart, okay? So I'm pushing the cart to another area that I'm going to cut. I don't do this and drag it this way, because if you trip, this thing's gonna fall where? On the back of your legs. It can break your legs. So always have control of it when you're moving. Move it this way. Move it over. Make sure you set it down. Bring all the hoses out and get ready to cut. Now, I'm gonna go cut. So now I'm going to light the torch. So if you remember on the lesson over there, we turn this all the way on. And turn this 3/4 of a turn. And I would probably repeat that over there to see if I have any leaks. I would turn this off and watch the gauges, and if the gauges move, then I know I have a leak. I've preset them already to 40 pounds, and this is 7 pounds. Now we have your torch. We have 3 adjustments here. This is your oxygen, notice green. We turn this all the way on and we leave it. This is your gas, so it was 3/4 of a turn there. So we're going to turn it 3/4 of a turn here. We light the gas with our striker. So now we don't have it blaring like this. We want to bring it down a little. So we've got feather on the end. That's what we want. We don't want it blasting. We got to kind of bring it a little bit, but not too much. Okay? Now I adjust it here with the oxygen. And I bring it into a fine cone. This right here, we're going to adjust it just a little bit more, and we bring it to a fine cone. Okay? Now we turn the gas on first, so now we turn it off first. So we turn this off, and we turn this off. The torch is off now. So now we're going to cut. I put on my green number 9 cutting lens or face shield. Number 9 is to to protect your eyes from the ultraviolet red. I'm going to repeat the same thing. I put the acetylene on 3/4. I mix it with the oxygen. I adjust it a little bit more just to make it down to a fine tone. And this is what cuts the material. So if I'm over here and I want to cut material, I can't just cut it like that. I got to use this. Basically, it's like putting oxygen on a fire. So I make sure I have my shield over here, make sure my bottle's far enough so that I don't have any explosions or any leaks or anything. I always look at the ground to make sure that I don't have paper, tanks, anything there, because it can become explosive. Now, first I have to get the material hot, and once it's hot, I pull the trigger down. Okay? And this is what it looks like when you cut under a green lens. What do I do first? Turn the torch off and turn the gas off. Then the oxygen. But you can't cut way up here like that. I'm not cutting here. Notice my hand is on the table and I'm steadying myself. You don't want to be cutting like this because you're going to be going like this. So you put your arm on the table, rest this hand here, and the torch is about 1/4 of an inch from your material. You can't have it, you're not cutting material up here. And if you cut it all the way up flat like that, it's going to pop back into your tip. So you always have about 1/4 of an inch right here, distance all the way across. And keeping this torch perpendicular with your plate. You want to be cutting like this, you want to be cutting like that. That's another lesson. So you always keep it straight up and down when you go across. And use what they call soapstone so you can make a straight line. So I cut it all the way. Once I stop, I go back to the same thing, turn off my acetylene, turn off my oxygen, set the torch back, come over here, turn the bottles off, we come back to the torch, we look at our gauges, I look at my acetylene, I'm going to go ahead and bleed the line out, so I don't want any gas residual in the line. Looks good. I open this one up, notice my gas on my oxygen tank has gone down to nothing. Now that it's nothing, close the valves again, and and I roll it up. So, and then I grab it and I move it into the shop. All right? We'll do a class discussion. I hope this helps you out. I wish you were here I could show you hands-on, but this is the only way I can do right now. Thanks again, and we'll talk soon.